Hi, everybody. My name is Tony Semerad. I'm a reporter with the Salt Lake Tribune. Welcome to Trib Talk. Today, we're very lucky to have Kevin Burt, the division director over Utah's unemployment insurance system. Obviously, the pandemic has put all of us in unprecedented times. That's clearly true for Utah's economy. There have been thousands of Utahns thrown out of work or furloughed or seen their hours cut since March with the pandemic, and many of them have resorted to unemployment benefits to kind of get them through. Kevin, welcome. I'd like you to first start with just a little bit of a recap on what we've seen in terms of claims since March, and roughly how many benefits, or how many recipients, I should say, do we have on state unemployment right now?
No, thank you for having me, and hopefully I'll be able to provide some help. So with unemployment insurance, it's a program that has existed for some time now, and it's a state-run program, a partnership with the Department of Labor federally. And what it does is that we issue benefits for individuals who are laid off through no fault of their own. It is important to understand the funding mechanism. What happens is Utah employers report the wages of their employees, and based on their experience with unemployment, we charge them a tax. And the employers pay that tax or a contribution, and then we deposit that into a state trust fund that is used to pay out the unemployment benefits. Now, for state benefits, and this has been what it has been for some time, is the state benefit is not a full replacement wage. So individuals who are laid off through their own, what it does is it provides an economic relief, a limited economic relief for up to 26 weeks at about a 40% replacement wage for those who are laid off through no fault of their own. And so that has been in place and continues to be in place for individuals who have been unemployed due to this pandemic or unemployed for other reasons. But we certainly have seen with this pandemic a significant increase in demand for the benefits. We, on average in 2019, took about 1,100 claims a week. At the peak of this pandemic, we took 33,000 claims in a single week. For some historical context, the highest we have ever had in history was 5,000 in a week. So 33,000 was certainly more than we've ever experienced in the state of Utah with people who have had a disruption to their employment. And then that has been trending down, but it still remains at a very high level. Last week, we reported 4,500 claims. And remember, historically, the record was 5,000. So 4,500 is significantly less than the 33,000, but still at a very high level. And as far as how many people are continuing to need it, because that's an important measure, unemployment insurance, for many people, this was their first experience with it. And they applied and they weren't aware that you had to do a weekly claim or a weekly attestation saying, here's what happened last week. And that is called a continued claim. And so that's a good indication of how many people are continuing to need the benefit. And for the state benefit, that number was about 77,000 Utahns that filed a continued claim last week. And so those are individuals that are saying, hey, I'm still seeing disruption to my employment. I am still needing the benefit, and filed that weekly claim. For some context with that number, at the peak of the recession, it was about 126,000 continued claims in a single week. And prior to this pandemic, it was about 10,000. So again, it's significantly lower than early May is when we saw the peak of the continued claims, but still about 7 times higher than the 2019 continued claim levels.
Now, it's important to mention there are a number of larger states, especially in the U.S., that this mountain of claims at the peak essentially kind of shut their systems down, and they faced huge backlogs. What did that peak kind of look like for you internally, and did we experience delay in processing claims?
Yes, and you are correct. It certainly hit not just Utah, it hit many states around the nation, or every state around the nation. And most states, or many states, actually saw their system crash. There wasn't a capability of individuals to even apply for the benefit because the system could not handle the capacity. Luckily in Utah, we never had that issue. We certainly did have to adjust on the fly, and we added servers up to allow people to apply. And prior to, it had already been an online only application. So the application was always available. The only disruption actually we saw to our application being available was during the earthquake. The earthquake, we lost service for about 2 to 3 hours, but every time since then, the system to apply and to file your weekly claims has always been available. Now, that being said, when you see that immediate increase in demand, remember the funding for the administration of unemployment is actually federal funds. It's based on a federal unemployment tax. And so it adjusts based on the unemployment rate of each state. And because we had record low unemployment rates, actually the staffing level at the Unemployment Insurance Division was at a record low prior to this pandemic. So not only did we see record demand in applications, we had a record low number of staffing. And then we also had this pandemic where we couldn't just bring a bunch of people in to provide to answer this demand because we had COVID-19 issues as well. We couldn't bring in hundreds of people and train them because we needed to make sure our staff were safe from the COVID-19, just like every employer has had to respond. And so we have seen some disruptions, certainly to our service levels when it comes to call wait times and chat wait times. And what we did and what we've always communicated is that, yes, we do offer chat and we do offer phone calls, but there's really never a reason to call the Unemployment Insurance Division. Unemployment insurance is designed, if we have concerns or questions about your case, we'll actually proactively contact you. So we try to find that balance to answer some of those calls, but our main priority has always been processing that benefit and getting out the benefit to as many eligible people as quickly as possible. Prior to this pandemic, our average processing timeframes were about 21 days. We communicated pretty clearly and often that it would be 30 days. And luckily, throughout this pandemic, we've been able to process over 90% of claims within 30-day timeline. And so far, actually, to date, since March 15th, we have paid out $1.2 billion in unemployment benefits to those who are eligible in that 16 to 18-week time period.
Okay, so by way of background, there are different chunks represented in that $1.2 billion worth of money. In late March, Congress passed what's known as the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. We all call it the CARES Act, which provided for some significant kind of additional relief benefits on top of state unemployment benefits. And again, as the kind of conduit for those federal programs, it fell to you at the Department of Workforce Services to kind of create new ways of delivering those additional benefits to recipients. Can you outline briefly just what some of the major programs that were made possible by that CARES Act money were?
Sure can, and that I appreciate you bringing that up. And I'm certainly not trying to make any excuses to the service levels, but it is important to remember we're at the lowest staffing levels ever because of the pre-pandemic demand on unemployment. We saw historic demands and then had an earthquake, so we had to move people and then we had all of these CARES Act programs that were brand new and never been implemented. And so all of this was going on all at the same time. And we were trying to find that balance of being able to get as many benefits out to eligible individuals as timely and accurately as possible. And so it certainly was a perfect storm when it came to unemployment. But what we wanted to do is, again, make sure these benefits were made available to those who were eligible. And there's essentially 3 primary ones that were made available with the CARES Act. As I mentioned, the state unemployment is about a 40% replacement wage. This pandemic was very different than a recession, and it continues to be different than a recession, in that a recession results in employers contracting their businesses and starting to lay individuals off with no intention of them being brought back. And it is also a recession, historically, at least in unemployment, has been a gradual increase in unemployment claims. What happened in this pandemic is the demand was overnight because the cities were forced to close And what happened is not only the businesses were closed, meaning everybody was unemployed overnight, but the other difference was that employers were very hopeful that they would be able to reopen and bring these employees back, which is very different than a permanent layoff. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, you had an immediate overnight demand of individuals that were laid off. Employers were hoping they would come back, but unemployment was designed only to replace about 40% of the wages. And so individuals were now being asked to stay home and stay safe to try and curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus. And they were hopeful to be able to return to their former employer, but there was no way that was possible with a 40% replacement wage based on state unemployment benefits. And 40% is not every state. Some states are significantly less than that. So Utah's about 40 to 50% replacement wage. So the primary, or one of the, certainly the most that has helped the most people, or that provided the most assistance to the most people, was a $600 stimulus payment added on to everyone that was eligible for a week of unemployment benefit. Mm-hmm. What that did is it converted the benefit, the unemployment benefit, to nearly a full, or in some cases more than a full replacement wage for individuals who are unemployed. So then it allowed them to be able to stay home and to stay safe, but also it allowed the employer to adjust their business practices to be able to respond to the coronavirus and create a safe work environment for their employees, and also a safe environment for their consumers to eventually bring those employees back. Mm-hmm. So that was that $600 stimulus. The other thing that was not available before was unemployment for the self-employed or gig workers. Remember, unemployment, again, is an employer tax. And so employers are taxed based on their reported wages, and every quarter they report those wages, they pay a contribution that's deposited into the trust fund. Those who are self-employed or gig workers do not contribute to that trust fund, so are therefore ineligible for the unemployment benefit. Hmm. And so what the CARES Act introduced was a temporary, fully federally funded pandemic unemployment assistance for individuals who are self-employed or gig workers to receive a state benefit, or receive a state-like benefit. It follows actually the exact same state rules that a state benefit does, but it now accounts for income that normally was not included in a calculation. Mm-hmm. And so individuals who apply for the pandemic can receive a weekly benefit, and then they, on top of it, get the additional $600 a week federal stimulus benefit, or at least it did through the end of July. And so you had the $600 stimulus, the pandemic unemployment assistance for the self-employed and gig workers, and then the last one was a 13-week federal extension, fully federally funded extension. And so unemployment is traditionally, or in Utah, it's up to 26 weeks of benefits. Some states are actually less than that 26 weeks. So Utah has a 26-week time limit, meaning based on how much you earned, we will calculate how much you qualify for each week and how many weeks you can stay on the benefit. Once you have exhausted that, then you are traditionally no longer eligible for an unemployment benefit, the hope being that you're reconnected into the workforce. But with this pandemic being the length that it has been, the CARES Act introduced a 13-week extension for individuals who exhausted their benefit and can transition into a 13-week extension. In Utah, what we did is we created that in the eligibility system that we use for unemployment. So an individual doesn't actually apply for the 13-week extension. They just will seamlessly transition to that 13-week extension. The main difference is that 13-week extension is fully federally funded, whereas the other benefit does have some state fund state funds coming out of the trust fund to pay for that benefit. Mm-hmm.
So before we talk about that stipend, which is an interesting story just by itself, we have a question from Steve online that I think you can maybe answer this a couple of different ways, and I think you've answered it one way. Will there be a point at which state benefits run out, and if so, when? And what you were just talking about is those would traditionally run for 26 weeks, mm-hmm. and the federal government has now paid for a 13-week extension to those specific benefits. Mm-hmm. Another way of interpreting that question is that, as you noted at the outset, employers have regularly paid into the state's trust fund for paying state benefits. We went into this crisis with that UI trust fund relatively well funded. I mean, especially by other states' definitions. Is there a point if we're having to pay these benefits for an extended period of time, these state benefits, will we run out of money in that trust fund?
Yeah, and you are correct. So in Utah, it's up to 26 weeks a person would exhaust. So we have seen people transition into the 13-week extended benefits, mostly individuals who were unemployed prior to this pandemic, because it hasn't been 26 weeks yet for those in early to mid-March. Hasn't been that 26 weeks yet. But there were individuals, again, there was about 10,000 people filing a continued claim before the pandemic that now were looking for work and then saw difficulty in finding work in this pandemic. And so they have probably transitioned in many instances to the 13-week extension. But as far as the trust fund, and that's an excellent question. So each state is responsible for its own trust fund and its own trust fund calculation. And Utah has done a really good job working with local business or with the business community and the legislators to create something that we were actually one of about 15 states that did not go insolvent during the Great Recession. Over 35 states went insolvent during the Great Recession, meaning they paid out more benefits than there were in their state trust fund, and it got to a balance of zero. Utah right now, before the pandemic, the Department of Labor has a calculation called the average high cost multiple that kind of evaluates the health of the trust fund. And what it does is simply is it says, if you stopped collecting any taxes and you had to pay out at your highest rate over the last 2 decades, how long could you last? So pay at your highest rate, no taxes or no contributions, how long could you last? And Utah was about 18 months. Now, historically, we've paid out in the last 18 weeks, we've paid out about 6 years of benefits. So meaning that 1.2 billion in benefits that we've paid out is more benefits than Utah's paid out in unemployment in the last 6 years combined.
Wow.
And so it's a lot of benefits that certainly has no historical precedent. But also keep in mind that the $600 stimulus that was available, the pandemic for the self-employed gig workers, the 13-week extension, those are all federally funded. And so about 68% of that 1.2 billion that has been paid out is actually federal funds. Now, that being said, it's around $400 million we've paid out in state benefits. So Utah, before the pandemic, we were at about a $1.1 billion trust fund balance. And we are still collecting taxes. Luckily in Utah, we have a 5% unemployment rate. So a lot of employers continue to report wages and continue to make contributions and are replenishing that trust fund. But it is certainly being tested. We're not concerned about the insolvency yet, but the longer and longer the spread of COVID-19 happens, and if it does turn into, instead of a furlough, into permanent layoffs and permanent reductions, yeah, I think that Utah will experience certainly a challenge when it comes to the solvency of its trust fund, but we don't expect that this calendar year. So this fall will be a very interesting test to see how the spread continues. How does the economic activity return? Does consumer confidence return? Do businesses adjust and people return to work at the same? But again, the one positive note is that the 126,000 that were filing a continued claim at the peak of May, that has dropped for 11 consecutive weeks. Meaning, yeah, we have 4,000 or 5,000 people applying every week, but we have more than that falling off the benefit, meaning they're returning to work. And so we are hopeful that we're not going to go insolvent. To date, I believe 9 states have gone insolvent. And what happens in that case is you don't stop paying unemployment benefits. You actually borrow from federal funds, and then you have to not only collect in Utah taxes to replenish the state trust fund that is now insolvent, but you have to over collect on federal unemployment taxes from Utah employers to also pay back the borrowed funds. And so we're trying not to do that. It's important to understand that individuals, if employers pay higher taxes, it does tend to compress wages growth. At least there are indications that that is true. And so you do want to keep those tax rates very low. Utah's been very fortunate in that the unemployment tax rate for Utah was I think we are the 7th lowest in the nation, even though we have the 7th healthiest trust fund in the nation. Mm-hmm. So we're certainly prepared for it, but it really depends on the length of this pandemic and how long, because we're certainly not done with it, because there's still a large demand for the services.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the length of this pandemic, when the CARES Act was passed back in late March, I think Congress and the president had a different sense of a timeline as to how this might unfold. Those very substantial benefits, the $600 stipend specifically, has now expired, if I understand correctly. There's a little bit of confusion as to when that benefit specifically expires. Mm-hmm. I think because of the weekly system that the states use to pay out benefits, technically that expired on July 25th. But can you talk a little bit about what it looks like from here in terms of that $600 per week per recipient stipend going away?
Yeah, and there is some confusion to it for sure. And so I'm happy to provide some clarification to that. So unemployment looks at a weekend, the week ending, and then it pays out. And that week end date is a Saturday. Mm. And so what happens is, again, everybody in unemployment has to file a weekly attestation, and that becomes available on Sunday. So on Sunday, this last Sunday on the 26th of July, individuals could file their continued claim or their ongoing claim and report what happened the week before. 5th. And if they are determined to be eligible for that week, they would get paid their unemployment benefit for last week this week. Mm. And so while the benefit did expire July 25th, individuals who are receiving a continued claim will still get the $600 this week. And then when they file their continued claim next week on August 2nd, that is for the week ending August 1st, unemployment doesn't expire. You'll hear on some media stories that, hey, unemployment expires. That's not true. Unemployment will continue for individuals who still have weeks. The pandemic unemployment assistance for the self-employed gig workers continues through the end of December. The 13-week extension continues also through the end of December. But all three of those programs, the pandemic, the state benefit, and the 13-week extension, will resume at the 40% replacement wage, meaning what they'll lose is the $600 a week stimulus. Mm. Many individuals will not see that this week. They will begin to see it next week. But anyone that applies for unemployment this week will not be eligible for the $600 a week stimulus payment.
Okay. So for some recipients, that's a pretty substantial reduction in benefits they'll receive per week. The Department of Workforce Services for the last 3 or 4 weeks has been well aware that this deadline was coming. Mm-hmm. And you've made some interesting statements about the stability of employment with regard to that benefit. Can you reiterate some of those?
Yeah, and that's unemployment. Many people who have been on unemployment during this pandemic maybe have never been on it before, and so their experience with unemployment is different than it would have been had they been been laid off through no fault of their own in a different time. Unemployment has never been intended to be a full replacement wage. It was never designed to replace wages. It was supposed to be a small safety net of economic stability, about 40% replacement wages, meaning if I'm making the X number of dollars, I can expect about 40% of that in a weekly unemployment benefit. And so what it does is it provides some economic relief, but it's never been intended to be a livable wage. It's supposed to provide some stability until a person re-engages back into the workforce. Now that $600 in many instances resulted in individuals seeing a full replacement wage. And so they said, oh, okay, well, I can just stay on this until this pandemic goes away. And that was true potentially until July 25th. And that's what we tried to proactively communicate, that stability found in unemployment was always going to be short term. allowing for both employees to be able to stay home and stay safe, to try and curb or at least certainly adjust to the COVID-19 pandemic, and allow businesses to adjust their business practices to create a safe environment. But now the unemployment will return to a 40% replacement wage. So now the only way to find that ongoing stability for individuals is through employment. Now, what we have seen is that some industries are really struggling still in this pandemic. Hospitality,
Right.
Travel, the event industry certainly are not at a point where they're returning. So individuals that work for those industries are probably still unemployed, and maybe the employer is hopeful to bring them back one day, but it will not be this week, and it may not be this year. And so what has to happen is individuals who are on unemployment have to start looking at industries they're not familiar with, or maybe haven't worked in before, that have learned to adjust and have been able to successfully adjust and grow in this pandemic, at least temporarily, until we're able to perhaps find some kind of a cure to COVID-19 or something that brings all industries back. But there are certainly industries that are growing significantly. Remember, in Utah, we're at a 5.1% unemployment rate, the second lowest in the nation. So Utah has a very diverse economy, which allows individuals to jump from industry to industry. Some states like Nevada or Hawaii that are very heavy tourist driven have really struggled to adjust. Utah is very diverse, and so employees that are in those industries that are still struggling do have opportunities in other facets or other industries to find that stability in employment, because unemployment will not be a sustainable wage moving forward. And so we certainly want to communicate that. It's been great to provide that stability, and it's worked. Remember, we had 126,000, we're at 77,000. So we've had several people use it temporarily until their industry returned. But now the individuals who remain on it are going to have to find some more stability in employment, because that 40% replacement wage is not going to be sufficient to not look for work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let's say I'm a recipient of unemployment benefits right now, and I'm, looking to going back to just the state benefit with this stipend going away. And I'm looking at different job positions, with regard to my health vulnerability. I may not be especially at risk, but I face the possibility. I've had a job offer, and I'm not really sure I'm going to be entirely safe from COVID-19 in that work situation. If I refuse that job offer, what does it do to my eligibility for employment benefits? That is, if I refuse specifically for health reasons.
Yeah, and so unemployment insurance has one national rule. Well, it has many, but one of the primary ones is being able and available. So individuals have to receiving unemployment. It is not a disability payment or a income-based payment. It is a person that was laid off through no fault of their own and is able and available to return to work, can draw that until they return to work. And so one of the things that will always be considered is the person able and available for work? And so if a person refuses work, what happens is the employer can certainly report that, and we encourage employers to do so. There is a lot of talk about people refusing work, and I think that is overstated, at least in the state of Utah, because we have an online option for employers to report people to refuse to work. And while it is happening, it's certainly not happening at the level that some have communicated. And so individuals are using it correctly in most instances. They're using it until they're able to return to work or they find work. And so I think for the most part, it's working very, very well. But if an individual does refuse work and that employer reports that refusal of work, what we do is it's called an issue. We create an issue on the case, and it will freeze the unemployment benefit from being paid. And then we do an adjudication process. Remember, unemployment is a tax paid for by employers to former employees. And so the adjudication process has been something that we do for every unemployment claim because it affects the future of that employer. And so they will have a say and whether that person they have an opportunity to state what occurred with that employee, and that employee has an opportunity to present what happened with them. And we evaluate whether good cause exists for the refusal to work. Now, we have tried to follow the guidance provided by the Department of Health in assessing people who are high risk, meaning individuals who are proven to be and verified to be high risk to COVID-19. In many instances, we will look at good cause for them and allow them to continue to be on the benefit. However, if an individual is just cautious or concerned about COVID-19, in many instances, they will actually not meet good cause, will lose the unemployment benefit, and also, unfortunately, sever the relationship with that employer who is bringing them back. And so we are doing our best to respond to COVID-19 in the health situation, but unemployment continues to be able and available. It, again, is not a disability payment for individuals who are now unable to work due to being high risk. And so it will be kind of a balance there. And what we're trying to do is communicate to employers, hey, employers, you should work with your high risk individuals and try to provide them a work environment that is safe for them. Can they create a teleworking environment or some other kind of environment that creates a safe space for them to be able to return to work? And then we don't have to adjudicate that issue. Right. We'd much rather the employer and the employee work it out. So if an employee is concerned, we would encourage that employee to talk to their employer about their concerns and work through it rather than just refuse the work, because it could absolutely disrupt their unemployment benefits.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, if people have additional questions about unemployment benefits, where do you typically refer them?
The best way that we have found is through the FAQs. I mean, our FAQs are built around what are the most common questions that people experience with unemployment benefits. And we experienced, hey, the first wave of our FAQs was how to apply. And then we quickly found out that, people are struggling with the continued claim. What does a continued claim mean? When do I do it? How do I do it? And then the next phase has been, well, returning to work. What happens when I return to work? What do I report? When do I report? Do I need to continue to file a claim? And so and then also the various programs. So jobs.utah.gov/COVID-19 is where DWS has all of its information. One thing that I do want to say, Tony, as well, remember unemployment insurance for those that are high risk and are struggling, and that 40% replacement wage is really going to make it difficult. Remember, unemployment insurance, since that $600 stimulus, has kind of been the primary resource for individuals. What we would say is that there are a lot of other assistance programs available that maybe have not been accessed because of that $600 a week stimulus being sufficient. So you have the SNAP or the food assistance program, you have rental assistance, you have heat assistance, you have Medicaid or medical assistance. There are a lot of other programs that now individuals might have to branch out and look at other resources to help supplement some of those lost wages until they're able to reconnect to the workforce. And those are also the same website, actually, jobs.utah.gov. The Department of Workforce Services administers the majority of those programs. And so individuals that see that significant reduction with that loss of the $600 may find some relief in the SNAP benefit, the medical benefit, or the rental assistance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we will post that address on our website. That's all we have time for today. You're very kind to come on, Kevin. I really appreciate it very much, as do our viewers. Thanks, everybody, for coming to Trib Talk today.
Thank you.